Well, I am a grateful follower of Jesus Christ. I'm on my celebrating recovery from brokenness, from divorce, anger, childhood abuse, and even a porn addiction. And so tonight we're hopefully getting a little real tonight. My name is Rob. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and to say that I didn't grow up in a Christian home is an understatement. From the beginning of my life, I really did believe that God could not love me if there was a God. My mom was 17 at junior prom when her and my father conceived me in the back of a car at Dundalk High School, right there in the parking lot. And the simple fact that I know that means you could probably guess that my parents did not have boundaries for me as a kid. And they would tell me the most inappropriate things. The lack of boundaries in my early childhood also means that I honestly don't remember events from the first 10 years of my life or so. They're blacked out. Maybe that's a way of God's protection for my life. My parents are what counselors call toxic parents. My father was literally forced to marry my pregnant mom at the end of a barrel of my grandfather's shotgun. They had a horrible marriage that would still impact me today if I let it. They overreacted to everything. They used emotional blackmail on me, often telling me that they had to get married because of me and it was all my fault. This means I was the reason that all the pain that my parents were going through, that I was the reason for it. The reason my father drank, the reason my father did drugs, the reason my father stepped out, my fault. You know, my father was physically abusive and he was an alcoholic. My mother was codependent, needing to be desperately needed, that she would never leave even after my father beat her. I struggle with holidays still today because they're often the most intense opportunity for abuse. My parents crossed many boundaries. They used all kinds of drugs. They held swinger parties right in front of me and basically taught me, live for yourself because no one else is going to be there for you. I learned two things from them. Never use drugs or get drunk. And two, use the people around you for your own benefit, not for theirs. You want love? Pretend. Fake it till you make it. Right? That's what I was taught. I remember vowing even to never smoke pot, all because of the mess I saw in front of my parents. I was like, yeah, it was weird because I was rebelling, not even having Christ in my life, against the drug use by not doing drugs, right? I was like, if that's the screw up you're going to be, I'm never going to be that. So as a teen, my parents would actually buy me weed and would actually see if I would stick to this. And I would find other ways to cope. I would lose myself in video games and especially in the arms of girls. I remember being molested by a babysitter teenage girl at a young age, and that awakened something dirty inside of me. When I told my mother, she didn't believe me. And this really hit me. I was dirty. And I could find love through sexual conquest. I do remember one day that my dad got in trouble with the law and was court-ordered to go to an AA meeting. So my mom forced him to take me, which meant that I had to sit in an old dirty basement of a church building while he had his meeting upstairs in the sanctuary. And it was in this basement that I had my first experience with God. I loved to read. There was a bunch of books sitting in a pile. I had never even heard that there was a Bible. And there I was. I picked one up, one of those church books, and started reading at the beginning. Never read one before. So where do you start with a book? You start at the beginning. I didn't know there were 66 books in Old Testament and the New Testament. I thought it was just one big book. So I started to read, and I opened it, and the very beginning said that God created everything good. That was weird. I read about how Adam loved his wife, and this was totally different world from what I was in. Good, love from the start. As I told my dad that I read the Bible as we walked out, he sneered, "So what?" And that negative attitude towards that seared that moment into my brain. Eventually, my parents divorced. My mom was tired of my dad cheating, so she left him for his drug dealer. This man, after getting out of jail, eventually became my stepfather. And believe it or not, his parents were Christians. They asked me, hey, do you want to spend a week away and go to camp? And I had one question. Were there girls there? So when I arrived at the camp, people were happy and singing songs and sharing wonderful stories, and I realized I was set up. I was tricked into going to Christian camp. And these wonderful people kept telling me about a God I didn't know if he cared about me, or even if he was there, that he actually loved me. I didn't know if there was a God. And if there was, how could he love me when my own dad doesn't? I was the cause of my parents' divorce and unhappiness, right? And if God really did love me, how could I have such a crummy life? But something spoke to me. And I knew that I needed a foundation for my life if I was really going to get out of this situation. I knew that I needed the love that these people kept talking about. I remember the dean of that week of camp sat me down. He had just had a baby boy. And he told me, and I'll never forget this, you know, one of those moments where a preacher actually says something and you remember, right? He said this, listen, one day my boy's going to grow up and maybe even wreck my car. Do you think I'll stop loving him? My dad, if I did something like that to one of his beauties, right, he'd probably stop loving me. But this guy, nah, he'd still love me. He'd still love his son. He then said something that hit me like a bolt of lightning from heaven. He said, if I can love my son even if he messes up big time, then why can't you accept that God, who is bigger and better than even me, would love you? And it was like a switch got flipped in my life, and I realized right then and there that God would always love me. And how could I know? God proved it. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to cover the sins of the world at the cross, both the sins that I had done and the ones done to me. I trusted Jesus Christ right then and there, was set free from the struggle of having to earn love and this burden of guilt from sin. I even followed Jesus into the waters of baptism and was immersed at that week of camp. By placing faith in Jesus Christ, it began a road of recovery. You would think that my problems would all clear up, right? Become a Christian, become a believer, and then boom, it's all taken care of, right? That's not how Jesus works. And if anybody sells that to you, run, because they're probably after your wallet. So, to be honest with you, camp was the only church I got, except for maybe when I showed up for Christmas and Easter. In fact, I would hold on to Jesus while I also sold drugs. I thought I was going to be a thug for Jesus. I justified my thug, right? I said, as long as I'm not going to do the drugs, it's okay to make money from the people who are. And eventually, what happened, I ran into a real drug dealer, a real thug, and he even tried to kidnap my sister. And during all of this, I was angry with my parents. They would not admit anything and yet blame me for existing. I remember getting beat with a crowbar, being pushed through a mirror door, and having fist fights with my dad and stepdad. I caught my dad touching my stepsister inappropriately, and I bloodied his nose to get him to stop. I had to take a baseball bat to my stepfather to get him off of my mom, because as soon as he got drunk, he became violent. And my parents kicked me out of the house, and I've been on my own since I was 17. And when I got on my own, a youth pastor took me in. He challenged to clean up my life and go to Bible college. And you know what? I figured, why not? This other life so far has been a mess. So while in college, at Bible college, when you were with all these other good Christians, you go from like all these people you were hanging with to these people preparing for ministry. I had to grow up fast, right? Here I was studying for ministry, and then on the weekends, I would party, use women for their bodies. I even, justified it at times because I was like, here I am, I'm giving my life to the Lord. I deserve this. I even at one point in time got engaged to a young lady, and that ended in a broken heart because I wasn't ready for what God really wanted to do in my life. One weekend, I came home to my dorm room, and I saw a dark presence surrounding me that night. It was like I could see something dark with fudgy edges, and it was tormenting me. I realized two things right then and there: God's power and Satan's presence. I called out to God and declared war on Satan. And I declared that I would no longer ride the fence. I would no longer live a life not worthy of my calling. I shouted that I would do everything it took to live for Jesus. And ever since that night, I've taken spiritual warfare seriously. And this was the start, honestly, of me coming out of denial. Because this doesn't mean I've always won the battles, but I do know that God is winning the war. And despite some victories, I was pretty brokenhearted. So much so that I thought, well, if I go and get married, that'll fix me. I married someone with all the red flags. And I thought if I could keep a marriage together, then of course I have now stopped all of my parents' generational curses coming down to me, because I could do it for the Lord, right? I was finally going to be a real man. I had no idea what I was doing. And I still had this nagging question: was God really for me? I mean, did he really love me, or was he just waiting for me to mess up? It seemed like I always had to step out and do more because I would feel the shame if I didn't. I thought it was more spiritual to cave in to my wife's needs and ignore my own. I thought it was more spiritual to not have friends unless she approved, because I thought that's what real men did, whatever the woman wanted. I heard that it was supposed to be happy wife, right? Happy life. And so I thought that was in the Bible. It's not, by the way. I neglected being the spiritual leader in my home. And honestly, I wanted to act super spiritual and hold people at a distance, and I let them see the walls I had built up in my heart. I could tell someone off in a heartbeat and then turn around and pray for them. My then wife and I were ministering and serving churches. I was hiding a porn addiction at that time while I was still a youth pastor and a preacher. I was searching for intimacy and should have trusted God. Instead, I found fake intimacy online. And every 4 years, we would move because of the ministry. I poured myself into schooling. I got 2 master's degrees from 2 different universities. And then my father died. In 2011, my father had a stroke from an opioid overdose. There he was, confused, scared, and on his deathbed, I led him to the Lord. And I believe when my dad called out for Jesus, that he saved him, even in the midst of a fog from a stroke. Amen. So during those 16 years of marriage, I had 4 kids, 2 biological and 2 adopted from the foster care system. I thought I was doing great because I had success in ministry. We had led a church going from 40 people to 250, and God was moving, right? My then wife, however, began to point out how angry I was behind closed doors. Even though I was a minister, I was not allowing God to work on my heart. She even began to fake being sick in order to get drugs to cope with what was going on. She began to gaslight me and claim everything was my fault, to the point where she didn't even want to follow Jesus anymore. I even hid that we were constantly fighting, and I used porn to cope when we couldn't get along. I was like, okay, I'm going to be free, and I'd go months. And then we get into an argument, and then I'd go back. I was stepping over people and would hurt them before they could hurt me. And by that time, we moved to Philly to start a brand new church. I loved Philadelphia. Everything was going great. 16 years of marriage, 4 kids, finally owned my own house, right? College was all done, and pride comes before a fall. The week before we launched, even after gathering about 20 to 40 people on a leadership team at this new church, the week before we launched, I found out that my ex was having an affair. Not only that, she didn't want to have anything to do with this new church we were building. And it was all my fault. She accused me of being everything wrong with Christianity, everything wrong with the marriage, and she left God. And I believed her for a long time. Everything exploded. My world crashed. I mean, I was supposed to be the one that stopped the generational curses so my kids didn't have to do this, right? And my family fell apart. My strength left me. I was a failure as a husband and a father. I had to close the dream of a brand new church in a city that needs it so desperately, which meant I had to close the thing that assured me that God still loved me. See, I was looking at the ministry success rather than the cross. So to be near my kids, right, because I let her take everything because I thought I wasn't worthy of anything anymore. To be near my kids, I even had to leave these East Coast cities that I found I was so comfortable in. I came to good old Illinois. And would God still love me in the Midwest? I'm not sure. So I moved to Illinois to be near the kids. I didn't want to be closer to her, but I knew I wanted to be here for my children. And that's when, in the mighty Midwest, Jesus began to pour his sweet grace into my life. So I began steps of recovery without even knowing about Celebrate Recovery. I had found that the 12 steps and 8 principles are real steps of healing, even if you never are part of a Celebrate Recovery. The steps are what makes it work. On this journey, I decided not to date for a year. I didn't want to bring my pain to anyone else's life. And while I did that, I cried myself to sleep every night for months. I went to counseling. I stayed true to a local church, which was the way it was set up was like I found a place to stay and could walk across the parking lot, and there was a church there for me. At first, I didn't want to hear what the church had to say because I felt so guilty. But eventually, God began to speak through them into my cracked heart. I made sure that I stayed involved, not just showed up, but stayed involved in a church, even when I knew church people can be mean. And they can be judgmental. And they want to tell you what to do. So I got a physical job as a mailman so that I could work on my health. And there I was, working the steps and not even realizing it. CR's step 6 says, evaluate all of my relationships, offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me, and make amends for harm I've done to others when possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. I knew that I needed to forgive my parents of that old trauma and forgive my ex of my new wounds. I also knew that they would never meet with me, nor talk with me about it, nor admit they did anything wrong. And I had to forgive them anyway. Forgiveness began in my heart because Jesus forgave me. Forgiveness is a journey, but it is the most powerful force in your recovery because it was in mine. You see, if I forgive my father and mother and the other adults who hurt me, then their toxicity does not have any poison in me anymore. It's gone. For example, most sons of alcoholics and abusers become alcoholics and abusive themselves, right? But when you forgive, God breaks the chain. So God has changed me from within, however, and I crave for him to do more. If I forgive the people around me, then I don't need to be perfect because my God is perfect. I don't need to be a savior and step in and pretend I can save everybody because my God does that. I don't have to fear if the next person's going to hurt me because God's got my heart. It's all okay now. I can tear down these walls because God is so big, he'll protect me. And it doesn't come easy. In fact, I know that forgiveness takes sweat and tears and blood. It does. Ironic, isn't it? That's the very thing that is the cross. God's instrument of forgiveness took sweat, tears, and blood too, right? I really believe that I cannot forgive someone truly until I let God forgive me first. Because I'm on the road to recovery and I'm allowing God to work his forgiveness into my life. I'm going to tell you today, I have some joy. I've chosen not even to drink, not because I think I want to add more rules to my life, and not because I signed something with the Assemblies of God or whatever, yada, 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 but because I want to help people who have a drinking problem. I don't want to be a problem for them. You know, during that year of hurting so bad in counseling, I wanted relief. I poured myself into the bottom of a bottle once or twice, and I was like, you know what? God still responded to me in my tears, and he helped me when I cried, and he began to heal my heart. And I don't need pornography today because I know I'm going to find the intimacy I need in Jesus Christ. It's in Jesus. I can also recognize those times when I let my toxicity from my past impact my own children. I have joy and grace to even conquer that. So God is for me. So I don't have to act like I'm special. I don't have to act like I'm here to save the day. I don't have to act like I wear an S on my chest or wear a cape. Principle 8 of CR says this: yield myself to God to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and my words. That's what I just want to do. Because I'm loved. And you're loved. And it's amazing. During this journey of recovery, I prayed that God would make me ready for love. And sometimes, when you wait on God, his timing is perfect. And you know what? He took a little too long for me. But then he did it. He came through. He even gave me the desires of my heart, more than I can dream of. I desired a true friend and someone that I could really walk with God with. And he brought me Chrissy. I mean, we met online on eHarmony. And yet God still did a work. I found someone I can trust. You know what? I don't have to fake it because she's got her own faith. I don't have to, I can encourage her and she can encourage me. I don't have to be her faith. And God is my strength, and that's enough. She doesn't have to be my strength because she's a tough woman already, right? I don't have to have her complete me. And because God is my completion. And this has freed me up to allow me to connect with her on a deeper level. I thought I knew what love was before, but today, whew, it's awesome. I know she's praying for me. I've never had that before. I did. In fact, one of the victories that God has worked in my life is restoring, this might not be a big deal to you, but it was to me, is restoring my ordination. I was a fallen, ordained pastor with a scarlet D on my chest. Divorce. You're not supposed to preach when you're not supposed to do that, right? The divorce could haunt me and prevent me from helping others. You know how hard it is in this church's denomination to go through a divorce and remain in the ministry, right? You know that I had to go through interviews and have people that knew what happened write letters and had my wife go through the same thing and go through years of counseling and restoration and all that. And it was a very transparent process. But yet, in 2019, the Assemblies of God took me through a 3-year journey and recognized that I am still called to serve as an ordained pastor. And they officially ordained me in 2022. I'm so excited about that. Not because I earned something, but because God brought me through. And because of what God is doing, my wife and I had that privilege of starting 2 different Celebrate Recovery groups. One in Decatur, Illinois with Maranatha Assembly, and then one now with New Life East Moline in the Quad Cities. The one in Decatur is going strong under the leadership that we raised up. We were able to hand that over, and we're currently leading the one in East Moline. And just last night, a 22-year-old gave his life to Christ and got baptized during the Celebrate Recovery meeting. And another friend stood who just 5 years ago was strung out on meth, stood up behind in our pulpit and shared his testimony that God had rescued him from drug abuse. And God is moving. So I want you to know this. If you're a newcomer here today, or maybe you've been here just a few weeks, I want you to hear this clearly. There's nothing special about me, but there's something special about our God. God has a wonderful journey of recovery for you too. It doesn't matter what your struggle or pain is. Maybe it's months of drug use. Maybe it's years of hurt. Maybe it's stuck in codependence. But God is still in mad, crazy love with you. It's crazy that God would love you. But he still loves you. And God is offering you the beginning of a wonderful journey with him. I shared earlier that I had to place my faith in Jesus and trust his wonderful work on the cross. And I want you to understand what faith in Jesus brings. First and foremost, it means that my past is forgiven. You can bring up my divorce. You can bring up the things I did to my parents. You can bring up all the stuff that I did to people. That's all right. It's forgiven. I'm free. You can't hold it against me anymore. And I'm going to tell you today that if you place your faith in Jesus, your past is wiped clean. Doesn't matter what you've done. Doesn't matter what you've done. God will forgive you. Second thing, you know what? There's a lot of people that keep turning to the bottle, especially after this pandemic, as depression is raising up in our generation. And why are they turning? Because they have no purpose. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So at least with a hit from meth or with a drink from a bottle, at least they feel something, right? And so today, however, I don't need to do that stuff because I have a purpose. Because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I have a purpose to love God and to love other people. And that's enough for me because that's what he's called me to. So not only is my past forgiven, but my very present today has a purpose. And yours too. And third thing though, my future is secure. I am not destined, no matter what my daddy told me, to fail. I am not destined to be the loser. I grew up in the trailer park. That doesn't mean I have to have trailer park tendencies. You understand what I'm saying? God saved me. And because of that, God will pick you up from the dust and the ashes, and he will make beautiful art out of your life. And you are destined to be loved and have greater capacity to love. And I'm not even talking about heaven. I'm just talking about waking up tomorrow knowing that his mercy is new tomorrow morning. I'm talking about heaven one day will be yours. Will you be walking with Jesus? And do you want that? Do you want that? Do you want that to be the decision of your life and the healing that starts today? Today, I'm asking you, do you want your past forgiven, your present to have purpose right now, and your future to have a hope? Today is the day you call upon Jesus, because that's what's going to get you there. Let me tell you about the ABCs of faith. If you decide today, right now, in the moment we're going to give you an opportunity and an altar call to make a decision. If you decide today, here's what I'm going to lead you to do. ABC. A, I'm going to admit, first and foremost, I'm going to come out of denial. I'm going to admit I need a Savior. I'm done doing this on my own because I tried to kick the habit. I tried to deal with the hurt, and I keep getting hung up. I just can't do it anymore, Jesus. So I come up and I admit that I need a Savior, and his name is Jesus Christ. And then, second thing I do, B. A as I admit, B as I believe. I believe not in Jesus. Some of y'all are believing in Jesus, but you haven't believed on Jesus. You know what the difference is? It's this. If I could say, this chair, I'm a big guy, right? But this looks pretty comfortable. If I believe in the chair, I know this chair will hold me. I know this chair will give me comfort. When I need rest, it will be there for me, right? But if I'm always standing around the chair talking about the chair, it ain't going to do no good for me. So I can believe in the chair, but until I believe on the chair will I find rest. And when I believe on the chair, that's when I'm finally set free. And so God has a plan for you tonight to not just admit that you need a Savior, but to not just continue to believe in the story of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, but to believe on and put your trust and your faith and your hope and your peace and your love and your grace found in Jesus Christ.